Hello and welcome to Business Class. My name is Shantanu Prakash, and today on the show we have a very unique and special guest, Ranveer Brar. Welcome, Ranveer.
Thanks, Shantanu. Thank you.
Ranveer, you are a celebrity chef. You're also the host of several widely popular shows about food and the beverage industry. You're a restaurant owner. You've been judge in MasterChef India. So wearing a whole bunch of different hats. Certainly a very interesting life, because people who are on the other side of the table, they glamorize somebody who's in the food industry, right? It's a very sexy profession to be in. So how did this all happen to you? So take us on a journey back in time.
So we were a farming family. My dad decided to branch out and become an engineer. And grandfather decided to stick to farming. I grew up in Lucknow because that's where my dad started working. And I was always fascinated by stories that wouldn't make sense to the logical mind, and most of them were about food, right? So even if it was about farming, your grandfather, he just looks at the grass and he says it's going to rain tomorrow. He's like, how do you know? He's like, I know. So I was very fascinated by this whole intangibles that surrounded food, farmers, and so on and so forth. But I never wanted to be a chef. Yeah, and eventually I think what happened was the city of Lucknow, it just made me look at food and love food from a perspective that you want to adopt and you want to make it your reason for living.
Young people, they love eating, but they don't really love, cooking. So there's got to be something behind how you decided that this is your calling in life.
See, the first thing, Chandu, was the instinct. So, if your instinct is investigative, right? First thing you do is, it's okay, but how is it made? Right? So when I started doing filmmaking, the same thing. I was like, no, it's okay. I can't be in front of the camera. How do you do filmmaking? Right? So it was the same with food. Itna tasty tha aur bana kaise? Right? And that's the first step. That curiosity is the first step that takes you on the other side. And it's true. I think it's true for everything in life. And once you do that, then you realize that it's just layers on layers that start to unravel. And with food, the layers are just so deep, historically, culturally, that you just get kind of lost in it and say, it's a happy place to be.
So what was the first time and what was the first dish you ever cooked in your life?
The first dish that I cooked was at a langar. It was gud wale chawal. So I used to just go as a kid to a gurdwara and just sit and watch people cook. Because I just want to sit in, folded hands, and you don't expect a 5-year-old to do that. And I did that for a really long time in my life, like 7 years. And then it was a very small muhalle ka gurdwara, with 30-40 people coming every Sunday. And the chief cook, his wife used to cook that meethe chawal, the gud wale chawal. And she had to leave. So he came and he said, well, you watched her cook every Sunday for the last 7 years, you might as well cook it now. So that's when I first cooked. And then after that, every Sunday he used to be like, no, he has to cook the meethe chawal. So my dad, he still calls me a langri, which is langar banane wala. Yeah.
And that's a mark of distinction, I suppose.
Yeah.
And then I believe you, defying your dad's wishes, you went and apprenticed with a kebab wale chacha.
Yeah.
And so tell us that story.
So I think as a parent, you expect your child to go into the most respected profession. IAS officers, and that was the conventional respected profession at that point in time. And I used to be a pretty okay kid at school. I had a fairly high IQ, which unfortunately Mensa kind of gave it away. And so my parents had these expectations of कि भाई engineer बनेगा या कुछ surgeon virgin बनेगा, and then suddenly this guy comes and says, I want to be a cook. So it was just shock, and it took some time adjusting. Fortunately they gave up after, they realized that I just went and I just cooked with Munir Chacha every day. They said, yeah, okay, now he's serious about this. It's not just a childhood infatuation. Let's just support him.
So did you at that point of time realize that there is, actually a career in this?
No.
Or you end up, becoming an executive chef one day? Did you even know those terms?
No. I liked doing it. I liked doing it, and also for me, the ability to just find something to get lost in as a 16-year-old was big,
So a decision taken with the heart,
yeah,
and
pure.
not with a logical mind or
It was,
brain.
yeah, not even the gut, not even the head, just the heart. Sometimes your gut says this is what you should do because there is a future in it. My gut didn't say anything.
But Ranveer, that's how millions of young people today make decisions. I'm going to choose a career because this is the starting salary, and I'll go to this college because I got admission there and I didn't get this stream. But here's, you, who's by all accounts Mensa level IQ, which is nothing to be sneered at. Thanks for telling us that you're so intelligent. And then you decide to completely follow your heart and decide that you want to be an apprentice to, this kebab person in Lucknow, okay, who's probably a small little, shop.
Rekdi, yeah.
Right. Okay. And so, once you took that decision, how did life unfold for you post that?
So it was the good parts were that you were working with your hand, and as somebody who's grown up seeing farming, who's grown up seeing your family get your hands dirty, whose summer vacations have been always cutting the the wheat crop, it was very gratifying because you were getting to work with your hand, right? The second most beautiful part was that the sense of creation, the sense of the ability, the power to create something from a literal nothing. That was very, very gratifying, and that's But then it's a hard industry to be in. It's a hard industry because it's physical. There are no written documentations of real recipes. You got to really, and at that time there was no internet. There was no internet. There was no Google. So you literally had to beg people for recipes, and information held a lot of value. Sometimes you have to bribe them, give them money. Karigars, that's how it happens, right? Sometimes you give them booze, sometimes you give them money, because even if they tell you 10 spices and they don't tell you the 11th spice, that's where the entire difference is. So it was trying to find your way in a very sort of a tough industry.
So this is the, what you're describing is really the informal, mysterious part where recipes have been handed down over generations, where there are stories around, food and so on. And then you made a switch to the structured, formal side of the culinary arts industry. So how did you, mentally manage that shift by going to hotel management school?
So initially it was difficult. Initially, in a hotel management school, suddenly it's all structured, something that I was never used to. And then, you have all these nice and clean tables, color-coded knives, and here you are, you always use that patre wala knife. And suddenly, and it has worked perfectly. And so it took me a couple of months. But then eventually you realize it's personal. Food is about forming a relationship with what's in front of you. And once you have that relationship, the surrounding really just fades off. And that's how it's always been. That's how it's always been. Those shadiwala caterers and those old maharajas who used to just set up 4 or 5 bricks and start cooking. They were the most amazing cooks, as good as many Michelin star guys. Just because they don't have a formal kitchen with a 50 lakh stove doesn't really take away anything from them. What just matters is the relationship.
No, it's great that you're a celebrity chef now, and you're speaking so highly of the Indian tradition of chefs who haven't ever gone to school. But your career took off to a phenomenal, early start. I believe you became the youngest ever executive chef of a hotel, and also the highest paid youngest chef as well in Delhi. So how did that make you feel when you tasted success so early? I believe at 27, you're the executive chef, and your counterparts in other hotels are 40, 45 years old. So did that sort of success go to your head?
I did. It did. Yeah, there was. I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't know at 27. I did not know how to handle so much success. And the worst part is it kept on coming. So yeah, whatever you're doing seemed to be working. You're on top of your game, and it becomes like an addiction. It just keeps feeding you. And yeah, I was setting myself up for my first failure, which came pretty soon. So
Ranveer, you had everything going for you, highest paid chef, and you are like a celebrity. People are looking up to you, and then one fine day you decide to abandon your fast track life in India and go to the US. Tell us about what happened.
So for me, everything works in threes. So three things happen. One is, you get in a hotel, you don't really get to cook as an executive chef. And I wanted to cook. I was missing that boy who used to just, be happy using his hands. The second thing that happened was, it's always the promised land. US being the place to make your dreams come true. And I wanted to at least test waters in that promised land. And the third thing that happened, which I always struggle the most because I have to speak in threes, but the third thing that happened for me essentially was I always wanted to have a restaurant of my own. And this was an opportunity to have a restaurant of your own outside of India. In India, early 2000s, freestanding restaurants weren't really the big part of the F&B game. Hotels used to be bastions of food and beverage. So, you couldn't really say, I want to do a restaurant for myself and, make it big, at least at that time in India, 2004, 2005. In the US, the freestanding restaurants were more appreciated than five-star hotels. So I thought it'll be a good place for me to go test the waters and just do what I wanted.
So it was also a period of transition in your personal life from being a professional, and now you become a founder and an entrepreneur. Were you prepared for this transition?
No, I wasn't. I think what happened was, sometimes you. So there are different founders, or there are different moving parts to a business who make up a business, and everybody brings some aspect. I brought the product, I brought the food in this game. Somebody else brought architecture. Somebody brought in the investment. Now I did not know, as a 27-year-old, how do I contribute to this puzzle? I wanted my piece to be the biggest and the loudest. Because I was passionate about it. And I really didn't allow myself to have enough knowledge about what the other people were doing.
Things like cash flow or other mundane things, right?
Yeah. And that kind of didn't really work to my benefit, because after a point in time, how much can you push the product, right? After a point in time, you realize that you got to surround the product with a lot more things, and then and that's where other people come and fit in. You really can't push your agenda, which is the food all the time, and say that's the only agenda that's going to be pushed. That's
so I think
the lack of maturity.
The first time you realize that there's more to a business than the product. Of course, the product is what brings people there, but there's branding, there's a balance sheet, and there's a P&L. So did you ever get a chance to actually study financial statements? Were you even interested in any of that?
I wasn't, till I went broke. So, it wasn't my cup of tea, and you see what happens in a hotel. Everything's so structured that you're just responsible for one thing. Everything just you're oblivious to everything else, and yet it works like a machine.
And you don't have to bother about it. You don't have to bother about where the monthly salary is going to come from. Yeah. The big corporation is going to, that money is going to come magically. But in your own business, you have to worry about this.
And that's when, and that's when it became, for me, I first felt inadequate.
First failure, first brush.
We went bankrupt. The restaurant initially did very well, but then a lot of things happened at the same time. The recession hit, the neighborhood demographics changed, and we were a very neighborhoodish restaurant, and I refused to adapt to what was going on around me. And by the time, I had gotten so much into the product that, you lose the ability to distance yourself away from what's going on to be able to get back in and fix it. You get too attached to it. And that's when I went broke, and I figured out that, I need to know more about balance sheets, accounting. The biggest learning was then I realized the ability to get your hands dirty in other ways as well. The ability to drive in the country like the US, that's very important. Yeah. You got to be able to fix your own fridge. You got to be able to, be a plumber when needed. You got to be able to be a dishwasher when needed. You got to be able to be a truck driver when needed, when you need to deliver outdoor caterings. You got to be able to do a lot of things, which is also getting your hands dirty. But sometimes as a chef, you don't enjoy it. But then I had to convince myself, or I got the fact that, hey, if you like getting your hands dirty, then it just can't be about food. And that for me was the biggest learning. The ability to get into detail of the smallest things and enjoy getting your hands dirty in things beyond food.
So from being at the peak of your profession, you are now the big B, bankrupt. Okay. And what lessons did you learn so that you want to make sure you don't make the same mistakes when you script version 2 of your life?
Yeah. So for me, the first lesson that I learned in my way when I came back up was people, right? I think in my time of failure and bankruptcy, the only reason, the first impetus is always given by people who believe in you.
Yeah.
Right? And it's very important to keep people very close to you. It's very important to be a good human being in order to bounce back in life, in business, whatever. For me, the first, it's strange how you start getting calls from chefs who've never spoken to you, telling them that they are these big chefs in these big corporations and they owe it all to you. How they reinstill their self-belief first, and so that was the first, that's something that I've always held closer to my heart, people. Second is, the only way to objectively look at things is humility. The only way to objectively look at things is making yourself the least important person in the room. The easiest problems to fix should be your own, and yet they become the most difficult to fix.
Fantastic. These are some amazing lessons in life, which I don't think you would have learned had you not failed.
No, absolutely no.
Right?
I think, yeah.
So tell us about the second chapter then.
So second chapter again started with a friend of mine who owned a restaurant in the US. We randomly met, and he said, he came to know that I was actually homeless out on the streets. He took me in, he took me to his house. And even then, I was too shocked and in denial to just realize that I had failed, right? And then so I was out in the streets. I didn't ask anybody for help. I didn't call my parents. I didn't ask anybody for help, and I did not know how to deal with debts, and I did not know how to deal with the financial situations. I never gotten my hands dirty there. And then he found out that I was in a sort of a mess. Took me in, and for the first 2-3 months, the first time I settled down and studied finances, and I studied, and I realized that a lot of it was actually common sense. And all that I did was just deny myself an opportunity to just utilize my common sense in other areas. And then we did a small menu together at his restaurant. And after that, we opened a very small restaurant together. Another small restaurant together, another small restaurant. And this time it was simpler food that was just like you'd cook at home, no frills, stuff that was easy to communicate, easy to understand, so it was like starting from that nursery, alphabets all over again.
So would it also be the fact that now you were catering much more to the market than to your own ego as a chef?
Oh, absolutely. I think the biggest mistake that we make as expressionists, whether you're a chef or a writer or a painter or a dancer or a singer, is you force your intellectual and personal growth on a consumer. Even if you're forcing it, you got to be able to refine it to the most simplest of ways. Sometimes you make life and expression very complicated, and that's what I did. And then once you simplify the expression, it becomes a lot more easier to manage, and eventually you realize that it's about all of us look for that sense of approval from the consumer. You cannot. The ultimate joy is the sense of approval. Whether you're selling a product or you're selling a service, it's useless without that sense of approval. Then it just started mattering a lot, and that's all that matters.
So eventually, how many restaurants did?
So we now have 5 odd restaurants in the US. After that, I opened one restaurant called Tag in Kamla Mills, which was the first vegetarian gourmet sit-down restaurant that we did. We won the Best New Restaurant Award the first year, but then in the Kamla Mills fire, we had to close it down, licensing issues, and the partners didn't want to continue. They were the owners of the place. And then we did a chain of outlets called Flip at MTV, which was essentially a beverage-driven wet-led concept, which did well. I diluted my stake a year and a half ago at a fairly decent valuation. So yeah.
Excellent. So you made some wealth for yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say wealth, but I did make some. I did get my family that sense of security that they always wanted.
So Ranveer, this is a very interesting evolution of you as a person, as an entrepreneur, as a food expert. So you started your life as a chef, became entrepreneur and restaurant owner, and now your vision has become so much broader that you want to talk about food and you want to make a larger impact on society. How has this vision evolved over a period of time?
I think, and I will give it to television. I will give it to television. What I eventually decided that I'm only going to travel, and the more I travel, the more I realize the broader connect between agriculture, culture, and food. And you've seen it as a farmer's son. You've always seen it. You've never been able to put it together, And suddenly it started coming together in my head. And then when you read about it, you realize that eventually all that, what it ultimately impacts is the prima facie body and mind.
No, it's great to see Ranveer the chef to Ranveer the guru, where you're talking about metaphysics and wellness and so on. But I think it's fascinating to hear that aspect of the story. But sort of coming back to the food and beverage industry, and you're a big spokesperson for that industry. And over the past, I would say 6 or 7 years, this industry has exploded in India. I mean, the number of people who are getting jobs in this industry is so important for the economic development of the country. The standalone restaurants that you never had when you started your career, they are mushrooming everywhere in the country. So for a lot of people who are fascinated, who watch your shows and see and feel that they want to be Ranveer. So how do you think today people can plan a career or a business in this industry? Is there a method? How should I think about it?
Well, I think, like you said, the opportunity today, we started with an entry level barrier. Today, there is no entry level barrier, which is a good thing and bad, right? I mean, an entry level barrier allows you to at least work your way upwards and realize that you're ready. A no entry level barrier would just, but for me, I think the underlying factor is the love for food. And once you have the love for food, right, then all barriers get broken. The ability, if you cannot enjoy good food, if I don't see it in your eyes when you have good food, then you shouldn't be in the food business. And that's what I tell people, and that love for food is what really underlies any food and beverage entrepreneur.
Even if you have to be an investor in this industry, you should love food?
Absolutely. I think, or the other way around. I think if you are a professional looking for investors, look for investors who have love for food.
That's very interesting.
Because unlike a lot of other businesses, the reason food businesses are difficult to scale, the reason food businesses are different than other businesses, because a lot of it is perceptional.
So food is also, as you said, such an emotional topic. We talk about food security. We talk about, how do we promote indigenous kinds of food. And, whenever we talk of food, there is also sort of patriotism involved in that, and there is religion and culture involved in that. So as a country that sort of aims to do a 5 trillion economy, so what do you think we should be doing right about the food and beverage industry in India? And what are the things that, if you were, for example, made minister for, food, if there was a ministry like that, what would you do?
Well, I would spend a lot of my resource on food processing and unprocessing as well. See, a lot of, for me at the macro level, I think it's a model that's set by the US. Post the World War, when people realized that the best way to make food cheaper was process it makes it available for people. But then also a lot of health issues come in when food's processed, because you're essentially either taking away, and when you take it away, you're adding it by artificial methods. So, and a lot of food, macro food economy has become about food processing, right? And that's where any macroeconomical focus goes. I honestly think, while there are a lot of mouths to feed and there is a lot of pressure on the government to be able to feed those mouths, we are a 1.2 billion country, and hence if food processing allows us to do that, that's a great space to stress on. But at the same point in time, I think we should also have one eye on real food, on reducing food losses.
Sure.
We lose in our country, just because of poor logistics, we lose a lot of food, even before it goes into the processing plant, or food wastage is different and food loss is different. As a society, we hate food wastage. So we would never waste as much food as the US. Because as kids, we've all grown up seeing our mothers take it and reuse it.
Don't leave anything on the plate, eat everything. Yes.
It's culturally imbibed. Yeah. But food losses are something that are a major part of losing food, which we then try and make it up by creating cheaper processed food too. That's the first thing I'd want to do. I'd want to keep one eye on food losses, bettering logistics, reducing losses, losses in our granaries because of lack of space, losses in our cold storages, losses while food travels. Lack of cold chain, we lose so much produce. 33 to 37% of produce is lost even before it goes to a factory or a market. And for me, that's where I'd want to spend a little more of my budgets on, if I were.
Fantastic. In terms of, speaking about the policy decisions and
Absolutely.
The framework for food in India.
Now that you've understood the journey, and and there is, I'm assuming you already sense the dilemma between a creator and an entrepreneur, and for me, a lot of times as an entrepreneur and as a food person who's a purist, there is this I'm never being able to get the creator and the logical guy on the same page. If they exist, they don't exist in harmony, and that a lot of times takes away. It's like that. It's like that fight between the commercial cinema and the
art
cinema, right? And they've never been able to exist today. And in my head, I've been able to say, hey, you know what? Live with the both of them fighting, make the most out of it, which is not the right way to do it. What would Shantanu have done differently?
So Ranveer, that's a really interesting question. And food is certainly art, and that's the way I think you've grown up to think about it. But it's also a big business today. So you can be in a isolated echo chamber and keep creating, amazing food as an artist and revel in your own creativity. But the moment you want to make a business out of it, it's got to conform to the rules of business. And the rules of business remain the same no matter what business you do. It could be a logistics business, a hospital business, or the food business. Your cost of production has to be lower than your cost of sales, the price at which you sell. You got to keep an eye on the cash flow. You got to understand how to rally your human capital together. You got to hire right. You got to inspire people. You got to finally give a return to your investor that has to be comparable with the return he might get from other investments. Otherwise, capital will flow away from your food business, and it is going to go to, it's like water.
Absolutely.
It sort of seeks its own level.
Absolutely.
So capital seeks the return, the highest return. And I think the art of being an entrepreneur is to marry this together. That's why I say it's art and it's not science. And some of what you said in the interview really resonated with me. And that fact is that while there is a lot of creativity, you cannot be a successful business unless you keep hearing the voice of the customer. You keep hearing what the market has to say. And your comment about making sure that investors also have passion when they invest in the food business. I think to some extent, the food business or the performing arts business or the entertainment business are businesses that really stem from a creative urge. It could be very different from other kinds of businesses, chemicals or logistics or something else, where you need different kind of skill sets. So I would sort of call this category of businesses the creative industries, and they have to be looked at slightly more differently. And as our country sort of becomes more affluent, the spending is fundamentally going to go into these areas, into fashion, into design, into food, into entertainment. So I think the work that you're doing, sort of bringing the hidden aspects of the industry out there and inspiring lots of young people to think about food and beverage as a career, is absolutely the right thing at the right time.
Well, thank you.
So Ranveer is a very interesting founder of a company. When he started off, it was an emotional calling that drew him to food. Something he felt that he's always had it in him, and that's the reason he was in the food industry, not because it was a great career option or he looked at 10 different careers and decided that he wants to be a chef because chef gets paid whatever they get paid. But if you see how his career and life evolved since then, you can potentially divide that into 3 phases, and a lot of lessons from each of these phases. The first phase was about Ranveer as being this young, highly uber successful chef, and from that success came certain opportunities to become an entrepreneur and to become a founder. And credit to Ranveer that he sort of caught that opportunity with both hands, but clearly wasn't prepared enough. Call it sort of overconfidence, or call it the fact that he's been very successful with the Midas touch in whatever he has done so far. So the first brush with failure led to a denial. How can this happen to me? But version 2 of Ranveer was, I think, a really exciting phase of his life and something which we can all learn from. You got to be smaller. You got to focus on the fundamentals. You got to listen not just to the voice in your head, but the voice of the customer. And that allowed him to bounce back. But I'm most excited about version 3, where he wants to go back and share his knowledge with society. He wants to research about, lost varieties of rice, for example. He speaks really passionately about food security and food policy, not just for himself, but for the whole country. And I think this evolution is exactly the way we should think about our lives. And what's exciting about Ranveer is the fact that he's fortunate enough to be doing all of this when he's still very young, when he's still got a lot more years to give back to his industry, give back to his profession. Thanks, Ranveer, for spending time with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.